Hello, and thanks for joining us for another episode of The Director's Cut, brought to you by the Directors Guild of America, where each episode we bring you a fresh and insightful interview featuring one of the film industry's top directors, conducted by one of their peers. You can subscribe to our podcast on Google Play Music, iTunes, Stitcher, or on our SoundCloud page at soundcloud.com/thedirectorscut. And if you're enjoying The Director's Cut, please take a moment to like, share, or comment. We love hearing your feedback. This episode takes us behind the scenes of director Matt Ruskin's new film, Crown Heights. Adapted from a segment of This American Life, the film tells the amazing true story of Colin Warner, a Trinidadian immigrant wrongfully convicted of murder as a teenager in 1980s Brooklyn. Convinced of his innocence, Colin's childhood friend Carl King spends the next 2 decades fighting for Colin's freedom and exposing the injustice of his incarceration. In addition to Crown Heights, which earned a Grand Jury Prize nomination and received the Audience Award at the 2017 Sundance Film Festival, Mr. Ruskin's credits include the feature film Booster and the documentaries The Hip Hop Project and Glen of the Downs. Following a recent screening of the film at the DGA Theater in Los Angeles, Mr. Ruskin sat down with director Gavin O'Connor to discuss the making of Crown Heights. During their conversation, Mr. Ruskin talks about the dozens of hours of interviews he conducted with the people at the center of the story, the influence that Michael Mann's films had on portraying the prison, and the careful balance between his roles as lead producer and director on the project.
So we just met. Hey, Matt.
How you doing?
All right. I guess the first question, this is like subject matter that's really important to me and personal to me, and I've followed for a long time. So when I got this call and heard about your movie, I was really proud to be asked to do this. My first question is, how did you get? How do you know about the story, and then how did you get Colin to trust you with it?
Yeah, well, first I just want to thank you guys for coming, and I want to thank you for doing this. I've looked up to you as a filmmaker for a lot of years, so I appreciate it. I first heard Colin and Carl's story on a documentary radio show called This American Life. They're incredible storytellers, and I try to listen to everything that they do. And they did a full hour about Colin and Carl's story, and it was mostly interviews with the guys, and just hearing them talk about their experience, what they had been through, and really how they came through all of it, just floored me. I was totally blown away. So, as a filmmaker, I wasn't setting out to make a movie about the criminal justice system. This story just, I heard it driving one day and couldn't get it out of my head. And so it was produced by a journalist who was working at 60 Minutes at the time. And so I tracked her down, and I wanted to be like the first filmmaker to get to them. And so she introduced me to Colin and Carl. And when I started talking with them, I realized that I heard a rerun of the episode 5 years after it had originally come out. And they had initially, so in 2005, they optioned it to a studio, never scripted it. Another studio picked it up, never scripted it. And then, 2010, 2011, I came around, and, I was this independent filmmaker living in Brooklyn at the time. And so I represented like the opposite end of the spectrum. And so at that point, I think they were sort of tired of the avenues that didn't work out, and were willing to take a chance on me.
Yeah, it's just interesting artistically, like when you get infected by a story. So I'm just like, why that story when you heard it, but it got like in your bloodstream? Like, what was it about the story? Is just the idea because what I thought you did so beautifully was it's a social issue movie, but you didn't make it about a social issue. It was such a human story, and it was so subjective the way you handled it about a man. And I love movies when I call them "It's Not Fair." Those "It's Not Fair" movies. But what was it when you heard it that you were the dog with a bone?
Yeah, I had just finished the first narrative film I ever directed. I made this movie for $50,000 with some friends of mine, and we basically just like set a date on a calendar to make a movie. And so the script was, we wrote the script as quickly as possible to back into that date. And I left that process really realizing that there's no such thing as a quick and easy little movie, no matter how small. And I really wanted to care about whatever I did next. So that, from a filmmaker, that was my perspective. But just hearing, for Colin Warner to spend 21 years in prison, being ripped out of his life as a kid who was still, figuring out who he was in the world, and an immigrant at that, to mature the way that he did in one of the harshest environments imaginable, and to come out of that, with his humanity and his dignity, but, and without bitterness or spite. To me, it just sounded superhuman, and it floored me. And then for Carl to decide that, when everybody else gave up, that he couldn't accept living in a world where an innocent guy could be left to die in prison. And so that, propelled him. And I think the other piece of it for him was this broader sense of injustice, that, they had idealized America and New York City as this, sort of center of the universe culturally, in terms of music and the pop culture that they were so influenced by in the islands. And this shattered that perception of the sort of promise of coming to New York and to the United States, and to just see how they, did this themselves, came through it, but also, there's no outside saviors. This is really, a really persistent, devoted friend, and a story of an extraordinary friendship. And so it just had all those elements. And like what you're saying, it was really important for me to not kind of hit people over the head with the issue. As a viewer, when I go see films that are issue-driven and I feel like I'm being told how to feel and told what to think, I shut down. And I feel like, it's pretty black and white what happened to him here. And I don't need to kind of put anything else on it. Just trying to convey their story in the most authentic way would, provide people with all they needed to draw their own commentary.
So let's start with your process. You write a script. Was it this sort of anthropological thing where they were involved in answering questions and filling in a lot of the blanks that I'm assuming weren't covered in the program?
Yeah, no, 100%. So I approached it initially kind of like a documentary, where I went and just recorded dozens of hours of interviews, and everybody that was still around were really sort of open to participating in the development of the film. So both the lawyers, the trial lawyer and the appellate lawyer, spent hours with me talking about their experience and sharing whatever files they had. And I got to meet the witness who sort of the last witness who really is a turning point for them in their investigation. I spent a bunch of time with him, and then obviously Colin and Carl. And so there was just this huge sort of information gathering process. And then as I was writing, I would just call them up and we would talk for, a couple hours if I had a question about any sort of specific aspect of the story. And then, the other thing is a lot of the transcripts from the trial are in the film. So the testimony of the child eyewitness and all that comes right from the trial transcripts. And the parole hearing as well it's verbatim from the hearing itself. And that was this thing I kept coming up against with this, was that, you often hear about people embellishing true stories to make it a better movie. And for me, there was like so much crazy stuff I had to pare back. And like, the parole hearing is an example of that, where he's telling them to look up words in the dictionary. It kind of came across to me as over the top writing if I made that up. And so it's like this balance of, what to leave in and what would potentially alienate audiences.
But did you, as a writer, were there certain things where, because it's not a documentary, where you took the spirit of the truth and sort of massaged it into something that made it more cinematic? Yeah,
I mean, all the scenes where the scenes were just, me trying to convey what were the sort of most important moments for them in this process, and the things that sort of define different periods of this struggle for them, or, turning points in their approach, and then just trying to dramatize that. And then there's obviously some liberties that we had to take. The very few, but the biggest one is that the lawyer that screws them over in the middle is really a composite of like 3 different lawyers who let them down in different ways.
So you have a screenplay, and now it's climbing Mount Everest here to get a movie made. So what was your process from there to putting the financing together? And
yeah, so I basically just went to everybody that you would think, and I would always tell Colin and Carl, like, we just need one person to say yes. But it was a long process of just going out to everybody who you would think would be interested in telling a story like this. And ultimately, I started off with one company who was shooting all their films in Louisiana. And I had negotiated like enough time to shoot exteriors in New York that I felt like it could work. And then I met as things become more real, other people get more interested, is what I've learned. So, when there was sort of the threat of it happening this way, another company was interested in taking the project to New York. And that was a company we ultimately ended up working with.
So it wasn't privately financed.
It was financed from
a new production film company.
Yeah, but it was a group of guys who were sort of newer to this. They had produced a couple of movies and wanted to make films that had value beyond just entertainment.
Gotcha. And then from there, what was your casting process like?
So one of the sort of silver linings of making a movie on a shoestring budget is that you don't get bogged down in these conversations about box office and foreign value. So we were really free to cast who we thought were the best actors to portray these people. So I met Keith Stanfield and Nnamdi Asomugha, and I just kind of became convinced they were the right people for the leads. And then I begged this incredible casting director named Avi Kaufman to do it. And she has a reputation. She obviously does huge films, but she also takes on smaller films that she cares about. So she lended a lot of credibility to the production, but also was able to get answers from people quickly. And she just has an incredible knowledge of actors, particularly in New York. Yeah. So she introduced us to people like Bill Camp and Nestor Carbonell, who are just among the most talented people. Yeah. So that was really the process with her.
So you shot the entire film in New York?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Right. And then what about? Did you have to? I'm assuming you had to crew up in New York. All your keys were from New York.
Yeah. It's a really busy time in New York, so it was a challenge, but there was, like the cinematographer, Ben Cutchins, is an incredibly talented guy who works on much bigger things, but, he's an old friend of mine. So I roped him in, through in a personal way and tried to do that as much as possible, just called in favors and, was able to pull together an incredible group of people. The other thing is that, these films are really hard to get made, but once you do get them past a certain point, I found with this, people came to the table because they felt like this was a story that needed to be told. So it ended up attracting a really devoted group of people who were there, for reasons beyond just another job.
And what did you got in regard to the visual style of the movie? How did that come about? What were the conversations and research and things like that evolved into what we saw?
Yeah, for me, it was really like just trying to tell the story in a really authentic way. And so there's a couple of different films, but mostly we looked at a couple movies by Michael Mann, The Insider, which is obviously a much bigger movie, and Ali, because he has this incredible ability to kind of make you feel like you're there, like you're in the room. There's a cinema verite aspect to everything he does, but simultaneously there are these like really, extraordinary cinematic experiences. And so just aspiring to that balance of, trying to find a cinematic language for the film, but also trying to keep people really rooted in the world, both feet on the ground in the world they were living in.
Yeah. And what about rehearsals?
Yeah, I mean, we were kind of dancing around people's schedules, so I would take as much as I could get. So with some of the people, with Namdi and the woman that plays his wife, I was able to get them for a full week, and I really, was able to just sort of work out a lot of kinks. It's really like a discovery process. You just kind of talk about what's on the page, and I just heard recently a director talking about actually blocking in rehearsals, which I haven't done, but having been through this experience, it made me kind of want to approach it that way, just because I feel like you could save so much time when you go to shoot if you've already had those conversations about the sort of physicality of a scene. And then with Keith and some of the other actors, it was much more limited to just a couple of days.
What I try to do is I try to get to every set before I shoot with my actors.
Wow.
And work our way around and understand the physical space, and never really put the scene up where you're performing it, because you want to kind of exhaust them, but just to so you're not, because especially with the limitations and the constraints that you must have had with time, that's always a scary thing, and you want to spend your days performing, not.
Yeah,
right?
100%. And there's something like 30 locations in this film. And so, because of the scope of it, we were always trying to figure out, how to find multiple environments in one physical location. And yeah, one of the sort of biggest anxieties every day was like, what is going to go wrong in that initial discovery process of translating what's on the page to a bunch of people in the physical space. So, that to me sounds like something that's invaluable.
Yeah. So, what did you use what was a prison? How did you find, because prisons are not easy to find in New York.
Yeah, it's tough in New York. Prisons are like a moving target. One of the big prisons that we scouted shut down the month we wanted to go shoot. So because of an incident. And then
which one was that?
East Meadow, Long Island. Somebody shot an anti-law enforcement rap video there, and the county commissioner got pissed off and shut down filming. And then Rikers was open for a month, and then there was, like a violent incident, and so they shut it down for filming. But there's a jail in Queens that's fairly consistently open, and we shoot there on the weekends because it's used primarily to house people on their way to court. So Saturdays and Sundays, there's usually no inmates at that jail facility. And it's an older New York facility, so we were able to shoot a bunch of the early Rikers Island locations there.
That was for your interiors?
Yeah. And then there was a prison that was recently decommissioned in Staten Island that we shot at, but it was like a film company was buying it for stages. But they hadn't completed the deal, so there was no electricity, no running water, and we were out in this shooting nights in this prison that was basically abandoned. And then there was just sort of creating prison environments in other spaces. There's this old hospital in Queens where the basement has these incredible green tiles, and it looks like an old state institution, which it is. And once you put bars in the hallways and phones on the walls, it felt very much like a prison. Right.
And then you're shooting 3 other scenes in the same location where you're supposed to be in different locations.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're an acrobat.
Yeah, I think in that hospital, we shot the police precinct from the 1980s, the lie detector test in the third act of the film, the parole hearing, and then all the prison phones and hallway stuff.
You guys did a great job, even with the exteriors, and I can see some of the stuff, the way you're framing certain shots. You're obviously avoiding things, but you guys did a great job. In New York, to shoot New York in 1980 is not easy to do anymore. The city is just a different city. So I thought you guys did a really wonderful job of that type of verisimilitude, which is not easy to do.
Yeah, there was a lot of like looking on maps for streets that dead end so that you'd have a much more sort of limited view.
Right.
And then it was just like we would draw these little charts of like how do you fill 3 city blocks with, the 5 picture cars that our budget allowed. So there was a lot of like swinging things around and clearing cars rather than replacing them a lot of the time.
You know what's so funny about, because I was there once doing what you did, and I remember I had a similar experience in regard to, you made a movie, shot it, I think it was 24 days. And how many days you have?
Yeah, we had 25. 25
days. And then, you have the Sundance experience, which is the ultimate experience for a filmmaker. And I remember thinking back then, like, it will never be like this again, because it's so pure, and every decision you're making is based entirely on an artistic decision, because it's not about getting an actor who's worth whatever they're worth in the algorithm of a South American calculus. You know what I mean? So
right.
So there's such a beauty to it, but the other thing about it is, when I hear you talk about it, it doesn't matter if it's that or you make a movie for 40 or 100 million. It's the same exact. You're still, the hurdles are different, the acrobats are different. You get turned into a pretzel a little bit of a different way, but you're making a movie. It's just all the same thing. You're telling a story.
Yeah, I wish you didn't tell me that, but I hear that everybody, you always feel like you don't have enough time or money. And I really felt like the time constraints on this were the biggest challenge, just because of the scope of the film. And so it was really a balancing act, trying to give, actors a space to work and trying to sort of shoot things how we wanted to. But then not sort of rob that from another scene later in the day or later in the week. And being one of the lead producers on this, the only person I could go sort of fight with at the end of the day was myself. So there was a lot of sort of keeping the big picture in mind. But
you're on as a lead producer, you're on the firing line. Then your financiers are coming to you at the end of every day or on weekends with the phone, and so that you don't have that insulation that you which is a luxury of having a producer who's sort of running interference. So that's an added stress to making a movie.
Yeah, I think the way I felt it most was just I could never abandon the pragmatic side of production for creative inspiration. I would let that happen momentarily, but I could never go too far. And so there was always just kind of trying to balance the bigger picture all the time, which we really felt on this one. It was really well run, but every day was like the most demanding day on any other movie I had been on. And I just thought the crew was never going to speak to me again. It wasn't abusive, but it was just really demanding. And I was really happy to see they all showed up at the wrap party. And it was a huge moment of relief for me that they felt
they don't hate me.
Yeah, they were all sort of proud of the work, which was great. Can't really tell sometimes when you're in it.
Did you go so when you finished shooting, did you just slide right into a post, or was there any gap in between, or did you have a whole plan to keep them moving?
No, we started fairly quickly. We had, because these films really live and die with the film festival world, we shot the film in the fall, so we were always aiming for Sundance, so we had a fairly longer post. We had a longer window before our first deadline.
Wait, you shot, for the next year?
Right.
Oh, got it.
So the idea was that we would never, we shot the film in October, November. We were never going to get it into Sundance or, a festival that early that year. So we had some breathing room in post, which was great because it allowed me to work with a couple of different editors. And
did they give you that much time? Did they let you just keep cutting?
No, there was sort of we cut intensively for a couple of months, and then we screened the film and we kind of took a break and just regrouped, and then came up with a plan for the spring, and I had a couple more months.
You got back in the editing room.
Yeah.
Because the thing I always find about movies is that you at least for me, I can just edit forever, and movies are over when someone says like, "Okay, you got to stop cutting now. You need to put your hands up." So it's interesting if you have that much time. I have to imagine the director side who's like, "Oh wow, I have a year to be cutting. This is awesome." Because it's the least expensive part of the process. You and an editor in a room.
Yeah, and it's cheaper now. I mean,
Yeah.
when I started, Avids were like $80,000 hardware-based system, and you can get it for $50 a month now on your iMac. But yeah, there was a bit of leeway there. I think I grew to really appreciate deadlines and boundaries. But this was, it was really a luxury to be able to say like, let's show the film to some people, and then know that we could then take another couple weeks to keep working, rather than being like, you have 3 more days and then you're done.
Had you worked with your editor before, or was it the first time, your original editor?
The first editor I had worked with before, he and I had worked on documentary films together, and he's just a really smart filmmaker. And then later in the process, I got to work with Joe Hutching, who he's one of the most,
I know the name.
yeah, he cut JFK for Oliver Stone, Born on the 4th of July. He's cut movies for Cameron Crowe and countless other people. So just to be able to work with somebody with that much experience, especially later in the process, was invaluable for me, because I didn't know what I was looking at anymore. And a lot of the sort of things that, you get hung up on in the edit are things that didn't work out perfectly. And so it's like a trade-off, and he's seen everything so many times before that, I really trusted his instincts there, because he just brings so much experience to the table.
And then just staying with the post-production process, how did you find your composer?
Mark, I saw a documentary that he did for Werner Herzog, and I was just really haunted by the score. It jumped out at me. And then we met a couple of times, and he sent me a couple batches of music that he had already made, that he thought might be sort of right for the film, at least a starting point. And I loved the stuff that he sent me. For me, it was a no-brainer. And then and again, we had the benefit of time. So we were able to just sort of work in stages where he would send me batches of music, and then I would try them out and react to them. And then, of course,
were you temp scoring it before that? Did you do a temp score?
Yeah, it's, I don't know if you have that experience, but like falling in love with the temp score is tough. And I had been through that before, so I was trying to work in as much of his score as early as possible. It's great. It's a great feeling when you fall in love with score that you actually can use. Yeah,
and you're always saying it's like the composer. It's like you have to top what I have, which is daunting for a composer because of.
And score was a big thing, because there's, for a smaller movie, I wanted the score to feel bigger. And we obviously didn't have the money to go record with an orchestra, but I didn't want it to feel like a small little indie score, and particularly with the scope of the film and the span of time and the gravity of it, I wanted something that would, elevate it. And he did a really incredible job of bringing in a variety of different sounds and sounds that you sometimes think of with, much bigger movies. And so I was really happy with the sort of balance there and how things sort of progressed as the film really kind of kicked into gear with the investigation.
All right. So then just walk us through your Sundance experience. So you submit it and you cross your fingers and hope that you get a response that's positive.
Yeah. You just try to forget that you submitted, because everything's riding on that basically. But Sundance was great. I was really nervous about showing the film, but the audience response was incredible. And we were able to bring the real guys, Colin and Carl, and Colin's wife, Antoinette. And it was really, I think, incredibly moving for them to see how people responded to their story. It was so genuinely touched by them and really just interested that people cared. So that was really rewarding to see that. And before we went to Sundance, I wanted Colin to see the movie So I sent him a link. I thought it would be, odd to see yourself, something like this depicted in a film, period. But especially, in a room full of 400 people, I didn't want that to be the first time that he saw it.
I would be terrified. That's got to be the most terrifying thing to have to show. I mean, I have to imagine if there's one person you want to love the movie, it's him.
Yeah, no, I was really nervous about showing it to him. And of course, his opinion, meant more to me than anyone's. And so he watched the film and he called me up and he was kind of taken aback. And he said, there's just there's something that's just off. And so my heart sank and I was like, man, I worked so hard to try and get it right, And so, I asked him, I really wanted to know. And he said, that scene when Carl takes my picture for the press in the visiting room, like you would never be allowed to do that there. You'd have to do that in another room. And I was like, all right, I can live with that. If that's the biggest complaint, we're doing all right.
Creative license there. He's one of the few people that's actually going to know that isn't honest. So so what's your plans now? Do you have another movie that you've written, or do you know what you want to do next? Or
so I just got involved with a script written by a woman named LaToya Morgan called Carried by Six, and it's a really different from this, but it's a thriller set on the Mexico border in a small town in Texas, about a female cop who basically becomes the sort of last line of defense against these warring drug cartels in her town. And it's just really wonderfully written characters. And it's a great thriller, but there's a lot of substance to it as well. So I'm really excited about that.
So you're open now to not only writing your own stuff, if something comes your way that you have an emotional connection to.
Yeah, 100%. I would love to just get back out there and make another film.
Oh, great, man. Well, I look forward to your next movie. It was a beautiful job, so thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
Big congratulations, man, of course.
Thanks for listening to another DGA Q&A. You can check out past episodes of The Director's Cut wherever you listen to podcasts or on our website at dga.org/podcast. Also, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe so you won't miss an episode. If you're enjoying the podcast, please like, share, and leave us a review. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks again for listening, and have a great week. This podcast is produced by the Directors Guild of America. Music is by Dan Wally.